Welcome, everyone. Good morning from Socrata's headquarters in Seattle, Washington. My name is Bryant Lau, Marketing Manager at Socrata. Before we get started, I want to remind you that we will be available to respond to your questions and comments during the webinar in a number of ways. You can tweet to #OpenData or @Socrata. You can also ask a question directly via the comment box below at the bottom of your screen. You can also see a replay of this webinar at any time on Socrata's YouTube channel, youtube.com/Socrata videos. Thanks again for joining. We're all looking forward to hearing from Socrata's Director of Open Data and former Presidential Innovation Fellow, Ian Kalin, about the most efficient approach to full compliance with the federal open data mandate. Ian?
Brian, thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. As Brian mentioned, we are going to discuss how to comply with the federal open data mandate. We're also going to talk about how to go beyond to achieve your agency's goals. We have a number of different folks registered for this event, so we'll be covering both a strategic level for how to go from point A to point B, but we'll also provide some time at the end for what I expect to be some highly technical questions, because some of the details of this landmark executive order and the corresponding regulations, some of the technical details can be showstoppers for a lot of agencies looking to, well, comply with the executive order. It's a rare privilege to share these details and ideas, strategies and roadmaps in this webinar, because I had the privilege of supporting, contributing to the executive order. And so now, as the phrase goes, I get to eat my own dog food, being on the other side, and I'm very excited to help implement the different aspects of this executive order. Our outline for today, really three simple pieces. We'll give an introduction for those of you that aren't very familiar with the different stakeholders and regulations. We'll go through the 5 steps for federal open data policy compliance, really making a set of opportunities for you to push the easy button, going from point A to point B, and meet this famous November 1st, 2013 deadline. And as I mentioned, we'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A. So who is Socrata? Well, here is a list of some of the government agencies and governments that we are supporting. Socrata is a cloud software company focused exclusively on democratizing access to government data. We help the public sector organizations improve transparency, citizen service, and fact-based decision-making by efficiently delivering data to citizens, employees, developers, really all the community groups in a user-friendly experience on the web, mobile, and machine-to-machine interfaces. In this context, for the federal space, we're very proud to be supporting a number of agencies to deliver on the executive order. As a survey, perhaps, for those who are not familiar with the different approaches that Socrata takes, many of you might be familiar with the Open Data Portal. That is the foundation of how Socrata was created, and it's built within we'll say, a suite of platforms and services extending through, in particular, apps that will provide a user-friendly engagement for the data into what we call GovStat, or Open Performance Management. These all sit on a cloud solution that allows folks to extract value from data, really transforming open data into products and services of real value for all people. So that's the intro. We'll provide a good amount of time to jump into the actual guides here. So what is this, as a bit of an introduction still, what is this executive order? Well, on May 9th, President Obama issued the executive order making open and machine readable the new default for government information. This directive and the associated memorandum, people tend to speak of it as the M-13-13. That's from the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. These directives will fundamentally transform the way in which federal government manages data. There are numerous aspects of this policy that, if you're signed on to this webinar, you probably recognize are rippling through U.S. agencies. But the fixation for many is this November 1st deadline for how to achieve compliance with the federal open data requirements. Although there was a thankfully clear set of instructions for what to do posted on the official Project Open Data website on GitHub, this webinar seeks to share insights from Socrata's collective experience on how to quickly implement each of the requirements and ensure success. So what are the 5 steps? Well, here they are, and we'll have a chance to dive into them one at a time to explain what they actually mean for your different agencies. But as a quick survey, the requirements are to create and maintain an enterprise data inventory, create a public data listing There's a requirement to create a process to engage with customers. This is a fun one. This is where parts of the executive order really speak to culture change and operational change within federal agencies. Step 4 is to document if data cannot be released, and really what this point gets to is privacy, confidentiality, and security, and we'll dive into that in greater detail. And the last requirement of the executive order and the policy guidance to clarify roles and responsibilities for promoting efficient and effective data release. So let's jump in. Let's jump into the first one. Step 1 is to create and maintain an enterprise data inventory. Really, what this is getting at is you can only manage what you measure. That's a axiom of the way businesses and government organizations can operate. This is really where a lot of the larger federal agencies could spend the majority of their time. How many terabytes exactly are within the U.S. government? Well, a lot, right? And so being able to itemize exactly what all of those are is a gargantuan effort. And for some agencies, particularly the large ones, they could spend the majority of their time just counting. As an example, here I have on the screen, for those of you who may be familiar with the data.gov Microsoft Excel template that we had to fill out when we were submitting data sets. I'll give a benchmark. When I was at the Department of Energy, it took an average of about 7 hours, labor hours, to add one data set to data.gov. Now, obviously, that number goes down if you do it in bulk, but it wasn't that different, particularly if it was a larger and more interesting set of data with diverse stakeholders. And so if that's just for one data set, it would really be impossible to scale across any real federal agency if you were to get a comprehensive enterprise inventory. So the subtasks underneath this step, you have to develop a inventory schedule. This is kind of subtask 1. And subtask 2 is create that enterprise data inventory, and subtask 3 is to maintain the data inventory going forward. The first two are part of the November 1st deadline, but that last one under step 1 is something that's moving ongoing. So already one of the insights we have from this executive order 1 recommendation is to really segment, just distinguish between what has to get done by November 1st and what is something that can be part of an ongoing process. So in terms of how to achieve compliance in this step, the recommendation that Socrata has is really to start small. There is ways in which you can leverage some of the existing work without having to boil the ocean, so to speak. An example being you can take what's already on data.gov, or at least what's on data.gov before August 1st. One of the reasons why that's a time saver is because there probably also has, in what's already published from your agency, the required Common Core metadata, which is a large time aspect of how to create an enterprise inventory. Essentially here, there's diminishing returns. If you were to get every single data set within your agency, you may not even make the deadline. So starting with something that's valuable, that's already been vetted, it's already been cleared, that's something that may be a time saver, a significant time saver, and allow you to comply with this aspect of the executive order. Beyond what's on data.gov, there are general principles for how to even figure out what data sets are most valuable as a start. And so our recommendations are to identify the data that supports your strategic goals. Open data is a national asset, so find those data sets that actually are best integrated to what your agency is trying to accomplish. You can adapt your open data goals to your specific context. You can analyze your site traffic. Great classic example for those using Google Analytics or equivalent to figure out what citizens really care about. A great best practice that we're seeing leveraged very well at the state and city level are FOIA requests, or Freedom of Information Act and Sunshine and Sunlight ordinances like that. If you analyze that series of requests, you can figure out what people really care about, which is really a proxy for what citizens care about, which of course is a common aspect to what all agencies are trying to perform. So let's go to the next step, the public data listing. So this is the subset of the larger enterprise data inventory. So the subtasks here, of course, are very clear. Decide what you want to publish, and then go publish it. That has to go to a thankfully specific agency.gov/data.json, or basically JSON being a representation of a formatting representation of the catalog. What we have on the screen here is what I'll call the technology stack, so to speak, of how all of these different work streams fit together. So you have your inventory, right, and that there's very specific items, and we can dive into them if people have specific questions as to what format you need to use. And what is a fantastic aspect of the overall executive order, very specific common core metadata. Thou shalt have these descriptors for each data set in order for it to be compliant. That catalog needs to then be published. So there's the inventory, and then you carve that down for any number of reasons, such as if there's any doubt about their public access level, which is one of the aspects of the metadata. If there's any doubt, probably shouldn't publish it by November 1st. But whatever you do decide to publish, what is unequivocally unrestricted in public, that goes to, as I show here from a site I helped create when I was at the Department of Energy, agency.gov/data.json. That feeds into, as a brief organization of how this whole technology stack works together. This is where CCAN plugs in. For those of you that are working with that system, CCAN is really the federated search that will pull from each data.json file into data.gov. The fun part about that is that there's even another layer on top for the user experience, the interface, which is fantastically powered by WordPress, which is a fun approach taken by the folks at next.data.gov. So how does this all fit together? What should you be concerned with? The agency needs to make sure that you have a plug-in to CCAN. How you actually get the data from your different silos, there's different approaches, but what we'll recommend again from the Socrata perspective is that you should use a tool that essentially automates a way to pull from the enterprise inventory to that public-facing data.json. And also, we highly recommend an automatic connection, not just from the creation of the data.json file, but also a technical streamline connection to CCAN. And if those two pieces don't exist, if those automatic interfaces don't exist, not only will you probably have trouble meeting the November 1st deadline, but any labor beyond November 1st will be really extensive. It becomes far too costly to be able to even update the public listing in any scalable fashion. I should mention, of course, that Socrata, although we strongly believe this, we're putting our money where our mouth is. All of the Socrata platform customers have an integration tool like the one I just described. All catalogs get automatically fed into a data.json file via an API or an application programming interface for those that are not familiar with how that technology works. Well, let's drive ahead because I want to, of course, leave time for questions at the end. So step three, engage with customers. Common sense, but a few very specific details in terms of how that's supposed to work in the context of facilitating and prioritizing data release. So there are some subtasks underneath this step within the executive order and the policy guidance. There has to be a creation of a process to engage customers, so create a process, and then make data available in multiple formats according to customers' needs. So one's a process piece and one's effectively a technology piece. In terms of the engagement process, there's honestly lots of ways to understand who your customers are, like many other, well, like all large agencies, particularly U.S. federal agencies. Your customer groups are probably very diverse. Really what this speaks to is the executive integration and support for how we're going to coordinate, we, the government, are going to coordinate some of that feedback. You know, in our commercial lives, we recognize this. If you were to buy a Christmas tree from Walmart and it broke, you'd probably go back to Walmart or Target or whatever and ask for your money back or ask for replacement. What's the government version of that? How do you return something that's broke? If you go to a website, and I think we've all had these experiences, we go to a government website and maybe the data is not right or it's old or it's not exactly what you're looking for. Where's that help button? Where's that contact customer service button? Do you have a suggested data set button, or I'm really looking for this data set, not this data set? There's a technological aspect to empowering people to have that customer experience like we would expect in our everyday lives. The infamous downside to that is poor customer service leads to distrusting customers, or in this case, distrusting citizens. And so I saw some experiences when I was working in the federal government where there would be an email address. So if you have a complaint, send it here, but no one was checking the email. That's no way to run a business. That's no way to improve the trust from residents and citizens that are looking to transact with your information. And so I think from a personal perspective, I'll say that this aspect of the executive order is exciting to see that there's structure put around how to improve that overall process of customer service government-wide. Let's jump ahead. Step 4, document if data cannot be released. And so what we have on the screen here is just a cartoon representation of how to distinguish between the ongoing business processes of what's happening within your agencies or offices. You have that basically operational layer and data layer. there needs to be, as defined here within the regulations, a step that formalizes how that information is managed and then presented to the public, whether it's coming through a mobile process, whether it's coming through contractors, which is a major aspect that touches even on the procurement aspects of how data is shared. And really, this is an area of the open data legislation, or excuse me, the executive order that cannot be ignored. The importance, the priority to rigorously protect privacy, confidentiality, and security is not something, of course, that any agency takes lightly. And there is this dual obligation. Agencies must publish data, but must protect privacy. And so this step 4 speaks to how that should be done. There are a number of references provided within the within the policy guidance, standards for security categorization of federal information and information services, the controlled unclassified information requirements, the Privacy Act of 1974, Paperwork Reduction Act, and on and on. I won't list all of them or go into too much detail. Really, at this point, our recommendation, given how close it is to that November 1st deadline, if you have not engaged the General Counselor and Chief Privacy Officer equivalent of your agency on this executive order, you need to do so today. That person, that leader, that executive within your agency has to be connected to this process to ensure that from an immediate step of ensuring that the right information is being disclosed, as well as the ongoing processes, and again, even the schedules that need to be submitted to OMB, that integration needs to take place from a process perspective as well as from a data perspective. The last step for how you can achieve the open data policy compliance is to clarify roles and responsibilities for promoting efficient and effective data release. So this step is another process point that has some aspect of a technical requirement. What I have here is a representation of how complicated this can get. So there's the policy presented from OSDP, or the Office of Science and Technology Policy. OMB is the one holding your feet to the fire. So there's an executive relationship with your secretary or administrator that's leading your agency. But if you're like, well, like the agency I saw from first-hand experience at DOE, there are silos. There are tremendous silos. Not just between how folks like the Presidential Innovation Fellows are looking to support some of the integration, but how does that plug into the CIOs, council? What about the fact that, as I mentioned before, a lot of the data is probably being held by contractors, so how do you find a way to organize that and get that out there? Whatever those roles are within your organization, you need to basically identify them and submit them to OMB. So the roles like communicating the strategic value, who's working with the information security officer, who is that senior agency official responsible for privacy, how do you scale best practices, how do you engage entrepreneurs and innovators, who's the responsible person to reach out to the nonprofit sectors, to encourage and facilitate the use of agency data, who's ensuring that data released to the public are in fact open and appropriate, who has that obligation to ensure that there's the right person connected to each of those data sets so that there can be that stronger degree of customer service, as we mentioned. So altogether now, wrong direction. Here we go. Really, what we talked about so far is how to get the 5 steps to November 1st. Hopefully there are some details there that are valuable to you in terms of a strategic way of considering how you actually meet that deadline. But the truth is, open data is a national asset. And it is something that is core to the way your agencies and offices and bureaus function. So we can't just look at this as a November 1st sprint. There has to be that long-term vision for how do we actually ensure that this is sustainable going forward, really as a way of doing business. And so from our perspective, we see that there is an essential role in which governments are not just the generators of data, but also the consumers and the neutral conveners to ensure that the ecosystem thrives going forward. And so within this representation, we have not just that the data is obviously generated in the performance of your ongoing work. Data has to be opened. It has to be a way in which you engage innovators, entrepreneurs, businesses, really the world, to leverage your data as a fuel for innovation, which accelerates your own achievement of your goals, leads to new products and services, research and development, et cetera, and then really the cycle continues. So, out of respect for your time and in a bit of summary, here are we'll call the Socrata insights and recommendations for how to comply with the executive order. recognize, as I mentioned, that open data is a national asset, and if you treat it as something that's core to your mission, it'll really help to integrate all the required elements to meet the deadline and then go beyond. We recommend starting small with your enterprise data inventory. Don't try to get every single data set in the history of your agency. Start with the ones that may have been leveraged on data.gov. Look at what your citizen groups, your customer groups are engaging, and make sure that those are good, that they have, and this is our next recommendation, the common core metadata. If you to put a data set up without the common core metadata really is not helping anybody. And then within that, the metadata itself, make it work for you. One of the required elements is the license use and the rights of access and the point of contact. So that also serves a major aspect of the privacy concerns and risks, as well as the customer service concerns. As I mentioned, a CCAN exists within the technology stack. It is the way in which data.gov is powered, but how each agency creates the data catalog, that's up to you. I will not hide my excitement for the possibilities of what Socrata can provide as a turnkey solution, but in complete fairness to the overall ecosystem, there's lots of ways to create a data catalog. We encourage you to engage your general counsel and chief privacy officer as soon as possible, if not already, to establish very clear owners as a good business measure of whether something is really owned. Can you fire somebody if it fails? If you can't, well, as structurally challenging as that business process is, and as shocking as it may seem to a lot of government owners, it is a good little exercise to figure out if somebody actually owns a required aspect of the executive order. And our final recommendation is to, of course, got to meet that deadline, but we encourage you throughout the entire process to think beyond. How can you greater serve your communities? As a token for your participation in today's webinar, and also for a much deeper dive in terms of how to go through the cookbook, how to follow the recipe for achieving compliance with the open data mandate, on your screen, at the bottom of your screen, towards the bottom of the screen, there should be a link for you to download a guide, a short tabletop guide, to ensure that you were able to meet all the different areas that we've discussed. And so I think that's it. That's all the areas I wanted to cover. What I'll come up here. This is a fun one to leave on, because this really speaks to how the whole ecosystem works. What I'll do now is I'll turn it back over to Brian and see if there's any questions from those participating in the webinar.
Thank you, Ian. That was a lot of great information, and we do already have a couple questions coming in. First one I'd like to start off with is, does Socrata integrate with the CCAN project instance at data.gov?
Great question. Yeah, the answer is yes. Socrata does integrate with CCAN. There is several ways in which that's done. The short answer I'll provide here is that there is a technology solution, a feature that was basically an automatic integration with the CCAN technology when creating a catalog. There's also the API fuel generation of the data.json files, which is really how a lot of the CCAN data.gov instance pulls the relevant information into data.gov. And that data.json file, as I mentioned, is automatically generated as part of the standard Socrata open data platform. So there's a few ways in which we do integrate, but absolutely, even at the city and state level, the creation of the public data.json files do plug directly into the CCAN architecture.
Great, glad to hear that. We do have a couple other questions here. I know we're kind of short on time, but another question we have is, what requirements are there around keeping the data fresh?
Requirements on keeping the data fresh. That's a good one. That's a good question. As I think through the details of the policy mandate, there are some requirements basically for quarterly refreshes and periodic reviews, but I think a lot of it actually comes down to the schedule that each agency proposes to OMB. There's an ongoing process, but to be fair, I'll also say, from my personal opinion, it's not super specific from my perspective as to exactly what needs to be refreshed at exactly what interval. And so really what that means is that you have an opportunity to prioritize those data sets that are of greatest need. It's also a complicated question because a lot of the data sets themselves are just more naturally updated than others. You know, some of the most interesting data sets may be a year old, and that's fine. Some really only have value if they're updated on a much more frequent basis. And so even if, this is not actually what's in the policy, but even if there was a every day at midnight thou shalt update X, Y, and Z, the truth is it needs to be customized to what your citizens are looking for. And so I don't mean to make it a complicated answer, but there are periodic reviews as mandated in the OMB guidance. But really, the step beyond that is to figure out what your customers need and then target your service delivery to those customers.
Great, thank you. One other question we have is, how do I understand what is due before November 1st and what is due after November 1st?
Oh, great. Yeah, it's a great question. So there actually is a very nice table on GitHub. So the Project Open Data GitHub site, and it's just, I won't spell out the whole URL, but if you just do Project Open Data GitHub in your favorite search engine, you'll see that there's an implementation guide that has a very simple table that spells out which pieces are due by November 1st and which pieces are due afterwards. We also have a fun visual representation of that in our guide, which again is available for download at the bottom of your screens.
Great. One last question. Who should I have on my team to implement this project?
Oh man, I guess technically the whole nation. Physically, they actually make sure you meet the deadlines. So there are some required characters. The CIO has a specific role. The chief or the general counsel, the chief privacy officer. Not every agency has both or one or the other. So those roles are explicitly spelled out. So those folks are mandatory, but it's really fun to see the diversity of agencies. You know, the large organizations like, I'll say, Department of Energy, HHS, VA. It's just a different type of bureaucracy than some of the smaller, more nimble, more startup-like agencies, and so you tend to have different folks that own this process. One other group that I have a fun obligation to mention, there are a number of Presidential Innovation Fellows on open data, supporting OSDP, but also in not all federal agencies, but a large number of them. They are working every day to help the U.S. government achieve compliance with the Open Data Executive Order. So if you have a Presidential Innovation Fellow, if you have a PIF, I want to reach out to that PIF. If not, of course, we highly recommend that you leverage the CIO's group and those privacy and legal teams to ensure that you're meeting all the requirements.
Great, thank you, Ian. That is all the questions we have for today.
Excellent. Well, I'll close off by saying thank you all again for participating in this webinar, both personally and professionally. Very excited to see each agency march down the path to meeting compliance with the Federal Open Data Executive Order. We are, of course, as a Socrata turnkey cloud solution provider, excited to support an increasing number of agencies to deliver on these deadlines, and overall excited to support the overall open data ecosystem. Thank you all so much for your participation, and looking forward to continued engagement in the future.